This episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.com offers a wide array of hotels and vacation rentals across the U.S., so you can find exactly what you're booking for. There's literally something for everyone, even those who are impossible to please. Whether you're booking for yourself, your partner, your picky teens, your sleep light, rise early mom, or your high-maintenance group chat, you can find exactly what you're booking for. For me, when I'm booking a stay, I already know I need a few very specific things. I'm talking blackout curtains because I hate waking up to sunlight, a comfy bed that actually feels like a hotel bed, and enough space so I don't feel cramped after a long day. And if I'm booking with my girlfriends, it's a whole different checklist. We're looking for a place with room to spread out, somewhere close to restaurants and the latest nightclubs, and honestly, just a stay that fits everyone's vibe without compromise. That's why I love that if I can find my perfect stay on Booking.com, anyone can. Find exactly what you're booking for. Booking.com, booking.yeah. Book today on the site or in the app.
For the haters, come on, do it now or later. Yeah. It don't matter what your name is, share your story, we'll be waiting. For the haters, whoa.
Welcome back, everyone, to For the Haters podcast. Today, we're sitting down with Starr to talk about what it's like to grow up with a parent struggling with alcoholism and what it means to try to make sense of that relationship later on. Starr's childhood was filled with instability, trauma, and moments no child should have to navigate. This conversation isn't about sensationalizing any of that. It's about trying to understand it through the perspective of a child who loved her mom deeply, even when that relationship wasn't safe. We talk about grief, memory, the things that stay with you, and what it actually looks like to carry love and pain at the same time. This is her story. When you ask someone about a parent who struggles with addiction, it's interesting what they choose to start with, because it's almost never the hardest thing first. It's usually something small, something soft, like a version of that person that felt good to be around. And I think that's not by accident. I think it's a part of them you're still trying to hold on to, just to remind yourself that it wasn't all bad.
My mom had blonde hair and blue eyes, and she was beautiful. She was a very bubbly person.
When you think about your mom at her best, what do you remember?
I picture me and my mom in her car, driving with the windows down, blasting the Pussycat Dolls, and singing along. That's what I picture.
Is there a specific song that comes to mind?
All of them. Honestly, all of them. She was a big fan.
But even when those good memories are there, they're usually not the ones that stay with you the strongest. It's the other ones, the ones where something felt off or unpredictable, or like you just had to adjust yourself really quickly. And I think when you grow up like that, you don't even realize how much you're paying attention all the time until you're older and your body still reacts like something might go wrong, even when it's not.
She was like Jekyll and Hyde. When she was good, she was great. And when she was bad, she was really bad. She had no self-control whatsoever. That is the best way I could possibly describe her. No self-control and no coping mechanisms.
And when something like addiction is part of your life that early, it doesn't come with a label. No one sits you down and says, this is what this is. You just grow up inside of it. You learn what to say, what not to say, what days feel easier, what days don't. And you kind of build your understanding of the world around that. So it doesn't even register as chaos yet. It just feels like your life.
When I was young, the first 3 years of my life, I lived in Connecticut. And I think my first memory, I was under the dining room table. And we still had one of those old landline phones with the cord. And I was under the table on the phone with my grandmother. And it's all blurry because I was so young. But the police were there and I was screaming and I was crying and I was wanting, of course, my grandma to show up for me. But she lived out of state. And they were either taking my mom away to the hospital, to jail perhaps. I don't know exactly, but that was my first memory.
And how old were you?
Under 3 years old, for sure.
When did you realize that your mom was different from others?
I feel like it was innate. It was never a question. I mean, you go to school and things are always relative and you see other families and you know that yours is very different. So I feel like I've always known.
I feel like kids always know when something is different, even when nobody explains it to them. You might not have the words for it yet, but you feel it when you see how other families move or what other homes feel like. And I think there's a moment, or maybe it's not even a moment. Maybe it's just a slow realization where you start to understand, okay, this isn't the same.
How did your dad explain her addiction to you?
My dad was very matter of fact that my mom struggled with alcohol, and I was always prepared from the time that I was really young that if she continued down this path, she wasn't going to be long for the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me more about your dad.
My dad and my mom had a 25-year age gap, so my dad is much older. He is 78 this year. And he was a teacher, a history teacher, and he's a wonderful man. Makes questionable choices with women, but otherwise he's a wonderful man.
What do you remember about your parents' relationship?
I remember it was so tumultuous, and I remember being a child and actually asking my dad to please get a divorce from my mom because I wanted it to be just me and him. But my dad always said he couldn't leave somebody at their lowest, right? So ultimately, I just remember it being really tumultuous, a lot of fighting, and my dad had to assert a lot of control over my mom in terms of not allowing her to have access to a vehicle, things like that.
And in situations like this, roles don't really stay defined. Everything starts to overlap. One person ends up caring more than they were ever supposed to, and the entire dynamic kind of shifts around that. And as a kid, you're watching all of this happen, even if you fully don't understand what it's costing everyone involved.
Sometimes she would just disappear and it would be looking for her. Other times she would have medical issues due to her drinking. So it would be taking her to the hospital. Also, sometimes it was just making sure that she was kind of sequestered into one area in the evening if she wasn't doing well. I don't have memories of her cooking dinner or cleaning the house or normal things, right?
Interesting.
My dad did all of that.
Beyond that caretaker role, what other roles do you think that you watched your father step into?
It's a good question. My dad was my mom. My dad was my entire world. So, he did everything. He was her caretaker. He was my caretaker. But also, in a weird way, we had a dynamic where I sometimes emotionally supported my dad as well. We did, especially during those times, have a lot of conversations that maybe I personally wouldn't have had with a child of that age. So I don't know. We have a weird dynamic, and my dad's taken on so many roles. He's like the end-all, be-all of everything.
Yeah. Was her drinking hidden, or was it out in the open?
That's a really interesting question. So my dad worked at the school, and my dad did not want me telling other children about what was going on at home. Every single person knew. I didn't have to tell them. Obviously, my teachers knew. They knew that CPS was getting involved and things were going on in my home, and word of mouth, it gets around. My dad works there. Everyone knew.
Yeah.
And there were also instances of her showing up at my school after drinking. So
There are a few moments from her childhood that really stayed with her. Not always the loudest ones, just the ones that didn't feel right. And this is one of them, because unpredictability like that doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. It just feels constant when you're in it. Like you're always paying attention, always trying to read what kind of day it's going to be before it fully unfolds. And after a while, that kind of awareness just becomes second nature.
it was another regular day, and I came home from school, and we could not find her, which was suspicious. So my dad advised me to go up to my room and shut the door. Just stay inside. Of course, I was a kid. I did not do that. I went upstairs and I started searching, and I walked into their bedroom, and off of their bedroom, they had a balcony. We lived in a 2-story home at the time. And so I walked in, and my mom has one leg over the balcony. And so I run outside and I open the door, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay." And she jumped. And we were really fortunate that she fell into the pool and not on the pavement. And she would not get out of the pool. My dad had to go in his clothes and carry her out and back into the house. And it was a rough night.
Were authorities constantly called? Like, was the authorities called in that moment, or?
Not in that specific moment, but they were called frequently, and specifically by neighbors. My parents would argue very loudly late at night, and people could hear, and they would call. And protective services would show up at the house. Yeah.
Do you think that was one of the moments that things changed? And if not, is there another moment that comes to mind where you're like, this is when everything changed for me?
So it's interesting when you talk about CPS. I don't think it changed a thing. You get someone that comes over to your house and you have time alone with my dad told me, be careful about what you say because you could be taken away from me.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I knew that. So you have children, they're prepped. I mean, CPS helps to the extent that they're able to, right? Like, I don't know. I didn't find CPS helpful at all.
How often were the authorities there? And do you recognize that as a unique situation to your family? Or do you think that maybe everyone goes
all
through
the
that?
time? I don't think everyone goes through that, but I feel like that's something I realized later. And it's funny. I called the cops about something. I lived in Atlanta and my car got shot. Like, I've had to call the cops before. And I went to pick up the phone to call 911 and my husband was freaking out because he had never called 911 before. And I was like, oh, I've done this a million times.
Wow.
But the authorities would show up at our home, not just for CPS, but multiple reasons. I mean, my mom caused all sorts of trouble, drunk driving and stuff around town. So the authorities would appear often.
What other major events stick out when you think about your parents' relationship?
There were so many, but another one that sticks out is my father was in the hospital with a staph infection, and so hooked up to all the machinery, and he was supposed to stay for a few nights. And my mom decided she was going to go on a bender and that she was going to take me to the Texas Roadhouse, of all places. And so she calls my sister, my half-sister, while she's driving us over there. And she's obviously intoxicated. So my sister calls my dad, and he rips himself out of the machinery. And he shows up at the Texas Roadhouse. And they start having an argument, and then he had to take us home. But it was horrendous.
And he was like just sick. He
literally straight out of the hospital, like ripped the things out and left.
Do you feel like that was often like events like that were just scattered throughout where like
my whole life?
Yeah. Like your dad never really put himself first of like
never
his quality of care for himself.
Never.
And your dad didn't drink. Your dad, was
now,
never.
Like occasionally he'll maybe have a glass of wine with me, but like never.
Yeah. Was your mom ever sober?
Maybe max a month at a time after a very long stint in rehab.
Yeah.
But for the most part, no.
And over time, things start to get smaller. Not necessarily quieter in a peaceful way, just smaller. Fewer people involved, fewer places to turn, fewer versions of support that actually stay consistent. And you kind of feel that shift, even if no one is directly talking about it.
She had friends from AA. I don't know if those sort of friends are necessarily good influence, right? You get a sponsor, and I think that can be very healthy for some people, and other people, I mean, you're mingling with people with the same struggles, right? And my mom's AA just so happened to be next to a liquor store, which is convenient.
And ironic.
Yeah. So I would say over time, support from her family definitely dwindled off. She had shown up a few times at my grandparents' home, and they have my cousins around a lot, and they're really young. And she was drinking, and so they didn't want her to come over there anymore. She wasn't allowed for Christmas. And then at a certain point, we decided to go through a process called Baker acting somebody. I think it's unique to Florida, but don't quote me on that. And essentially, you go to court to mandate somebody into involuntary rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. And so I think after we went through all of that, and obviously prior to that, we paid for a lot of rehabs as well, the family sort of started to give up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does the support from her family look like for you? Is there any direct connection support there?
No. I mean, I have a relationship with my family, but we definitely don't talk about those subjects. It never goes well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is that purposeful on your side or purposeful on their side?
It's definitely purposeful on my side at this point, but I've had a lot of tough conversations with my grandma about it. And she said some things that I will always struggle to forgive her for.
Okay.
And so I think it's better and healthier for our relationship if we don't breach those subjects anymore.
And you just create that boundary and just have the relationship as what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to take people for what they are.
And sometimes the only place that actually feels steady is the one where nothing is happening at all. No tension to manage, no reactions to anticipate, just space. And when you're used to things being unpredictable, that kind of stillness can feel like the closest thing to safety.
When I was alone at night in my bed, I remember feeling really safe. And I was saying this to my husband the other day, I used to lay at night and I swear I would be up for like an hour or two, just imagining what my future would be like. And I really held on to that because I didn't want to be in the house that I was in, right? And I would just dream about what it was like when I would be older and I would have more agency over my life.
Things just didn't suddenly fall apart all at once. For Starr, it happened on what felt like a regular day. There was no preparation, just a sudden shock. That removed whatever structure had been holding things together, even if that structure wasn't healthy to begin with.
I feel like I disassociate from so much of this stuff, but I was at school, regular school day, and I guess my dad got a call from our neighbors that there was a moving truck out in front of the house. And so he went home. There was some sort of altercation between them, and the police came to my school to let me know that my parents were getting divorced and that I needed to go actually with my mother. And so my mother ended up having, until they settled it, full custody of me for about a month. That was a really dark time for me. And then after that, it sort of settled into split, and then quickly my dad got full custody of me, luckily.
Did your mom fight for you to have full custody? Or was it just like that's the natural step of the state?
That's the natural step of the state.
Interesting. Yeah. In those moments that you're with your mom, is your dad trying to contact you? Do you have contact with your father?
Yeah.
What are those feelings that come up then?
The feelings that came up then were, it was only a matter of time. I mean, this wasn't going to last. It was not possible for it to last. I think it lasted longer than it should have. I think the first time the police showed up there, that should have been it, right? This only lasted for about 6 months, but I did have access to a phone, and I was able to call my dad and communicate with him. And again, he worked at my school, so I was still seeing him every single day.
How old are you at this time?
When my parents got divorced, I was 10.
Okay. How does life? 10's early. I couldn't even tell you a single memory of mine at 10, and
it's hard to recall everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does life look like after the divorce?
It got worse before it got better. When I was at my mom's house, there was a lot of neglect and a lot of abuse. And then eventually I was able to go live full time with my dad, and that definitely improved my quality of life. But there is still that aspect of you have to have mandated visits, and soon it became supervised visits, but they were still mandated. Mm-hmm. And then it did reach a certain point where we were able to stop completely, which was
where your
ideal.
Father got full custody?
Yeah, well, the cutting communication off completely happened after one instance, and it was the last time I ever saw her, and it was not good.
Yeah.
And that was really freeing for me. I didn't speak to her at all it was a good year, and I have absolutely no regrets about it.
How was your mom after she lost your dad as a caretaker?
It's interesting because she did find another older man very, very quickly. And he took care of her. I don't think the same way that my dad took care of her. But I think she looked at the divorce as something that ruined her life. And it was definitely something that separated her and I a lot. It was an easy way for me to remove myself from the relationship because now we're not in the same home, right? And I think that really destroyed her.
Do you think that when you look at separation, right? Like kids who have divorced parents have such like this concept of like how it ruined a lot of their family. Do you think that ultimately you feel like the divorce saved your family?
Yeah, I feel the opposite.
Yeah. Do you have a hard time like understanding like when you hear other people like talk about their experience with divorced parents, or like even the stigma around like having divorced parents? Like I feel like you almost could say that it like saved you, the divorce.
I definitely think it saved me, and I'm open to other people's perspectives, right? Everyone has a different experience, but I think ultimately if two people aren't happy together, they should not be together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did your dad take the divorce?
It's interesting because my dad took it really hard at first until it was really easy. My dad is super clingy. It's the best way I can describe him.
Yeah.
He has a partner now and he wants to be with her 24/7. That's its own problem. So the divorce was definitely hard on my dad at first just because that separation from his partner, right? But I think it ended up being really freeing for him, and he quickly realized how much his stress had diminished.
Yeah. Do you think your dad would have ever initiated the divorce? Because your mom initiated it, right?
Yeah, I would like to say yes, but I don't know if that's true.
By the time you get a little older, you're not experiencing things the same way anymore. You're more aware. You're already seen enough to understand what's possible. And that awareness kind of follows you into everything else.
I had my first drink, I think I was 16, but with friends. It wasn't like, hey, I'm going through your drawers and finding alcohol and
Yeah.
giving it a try. It was, a fun night out with friends, but I definitely had concern that I would have the same issues. And I was so naive at the time, right? But I took my first sip and I was like, oh, this is terrible. Thank goodness. But obviously things develop over time, right? I was young, naive, and
Yeah.
whatever. I'm very lucky and I'm very thankful that I don't have a problem, but I definitely worry about passing something like that along to my children.
Yeah. 16 is late, at least in my mind, to have a first drink. I think that it's not, I don't want to say impressive. That's not the word that I would use. I think it's interesting that you did wait till 16 to try a beverage, with it being, so dominant in your house and around.
She's just starting to step into her own life at this point, figuring things out the way most teenagers do, but with a very different understanding of what things can turn into. Because addiction wasn't something distant for her. It was something she had already seen close up. And then not long after that, everything shifts again in a way you can't really prepare for, no matter how much you think you've already seen.
So it was January 2nd, so right after New Year. And so I was like spending the weekend at my best friend at the time's house. And I slept over. We woke up in the morning and we wanted to go to the mall like any other teenage girls. And her mom was like, I'm going to make you guys breakfast. Like, what's wrong with you? You never make us breakfast. It was a tactic to try and keep us there because my father had called her and let her know that my mom had passed away and that he was coming over to come get me. And so he comes to the house. They're like, your dad's here. And I come down the stairs and I'm like, what did I do? My dad's like, you're not in trouble. And so I was like, did my grandma die? No. Did mom die? Yes. And I said, okay, I'm going to go get my stuff. My best friend actually ended up coming with me, and we went to the house, and her body was still there, and the ambulance was there. And they were removing her. And that was probably the most stressful part of the day. Obviously, seeing her, she was in a really poor condition. What happened was she was drinking a lot one night. She went into the bathroom to throw up, and her stomach and her esophagus just tore open. And so she bled out all over the bathroom floor. It was a scene. So that was definitely a difficult moment. And one of the things I remember the most vividly is all the rubbernecking that was going on, ambulance outside the neighborhood. That set me on fire. I still think about that because it was just such a private, insane moment. And that very night, I just remember she was living with her boyfriend at the time. I was like, we gotta start cleaning out her stuff. I just had this desire to start trying to help or do something. And it was just a tough week. And honestly, I think the toughest part of the whole experience for me was right before the funeral thinking, what's supposed to happen when this is over? Like, am I supposed to go back to my everyday life and act like this didn't happen? That was incredibly stressful for me.
Did you feel emotions that you didn't expect to feel when you found out that she had passed?
I felt emotions that I expected, but I think it's hard for me to maybe explain to other people the relief that I felt. That was exactly what I felt. When you care about somebody who's struggling like that, and you have absolutely no control over what they're doing, you're constantly wondering, where are they? What kind of trouble are they in? And it's freeing to not have to worry about somebody anymore and to just think, okay, this person's at peace. Because ultimately, I think my mom didn't want to be here, right? And she got what she wanted.
Yeah. How did your dad react?
Detached. I think my dad was just trying to be there for me, but he was pretty detached from the entire situation at that point.
This is the part that's hard to explain to people because it's never just one emotion. You can miss someone and still feel angry. You can understand them and still not be able to make sense of what they did. And all of that kind of exists at the same time.
You said your automatic reaction was to clean and get rid of her stuff.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is the way that you felt?
I'm a fixer. I am also a control freak, and I feel like that's my way of trying to take control of something.
Did you? Is that what like you did next? Is like handle? Was that your responsibility? Was that your dad's responsibility? Was it her boyfriend's? Who was responsible for her decisions?
Me and my grandparents, and we definitely did not agree on everything.
Okay.
Which was complicated, and my grandma had a lot of feelings and still does to this day on that sort of thing.
What was her funeral like?
It was tough, and it's interesting too because I was so young, and I think it was something I struggled with too. Was it's hard for my peers to understand. They've never been through anything like that, right? And it was interesting. I had a friend recently say to me, "I'm so sorry I didn't come to your mom's funeral," and I was like, you shouldn't have had to, we were all 16. If it was overwhelming and stressful for you at the time, like, you did what was best for you. Don't feel bad about that. And the older I get, the more I've come to terms with that. But at the time when I was younger, it was really hard not to have my peers understand me. Something else, I think the major thing my grandma and I disagreed on was having a wake. And that was really hard for me. It was like an 8-hour experience. And I do remember, the day of the funeral, I think we did the wake one day and the funeral the next. And the funeral, I really let it all out. I hugged the casket. I let myself feel everything I was feeling. And for me, what was really like cathartic was watching the casket go down. And I was like, okay, this is it. My grandma couldn't even watch. She resented me for staying to watch. And I was like, you do what you need to do. I'll do what I need to do. But it was a stressful day. And I think the most stressful part of it was when it was over because I was like, what now? Am I supposed to go back to my work, my classes, and just act like this didn't happen? It's just changed the trajectory of my entire life.
Yeah. Did you have a say in the funeral planning? Did you help plan it?
Yeah, I picked her plot. I designed her gravestone. I picked her casket, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like planning it was a step in your grief and healing process?
No. I feel like it was more a tug of war between me and my grandmother somehow, to be honest. She wanted things done so differently than what I would have envisioned for her. But we met somewhat in the middle. But no, I didn't think it wasn't any like form of closure for me.
I think something people always don't realize is how much there is to do after someone dies. There's logistics, decisions, people around you constantly, and then it all stops. And you're left in the quiet without anything to organize or fix. But sometimes that's also when things start to surface. Because even after someone is gone, there are still parts of them you haven't seen yet.
I would love to talk about the journals.
Okay.
When did you find out that she had journals, and when did you become in possession of them?
I think I came into possession of them shortly after she passed away, but I didn't actually take a look at them for probably a year or two.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
a long time to hold an item of like without looking. Was there no interest to read them, or did you forget about them, or
There was no interest, maybe a little fear of what I was going to read, and rightfully so.
yeah.
Um,
Did you know that she kept journals?
I knew that she wrote. I didn't realize that it was really in journal format. She did a lot of like prayer notes, right? So yes and no. Didn't realize she wrote to that extent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of things did she write about?
She wrote about sometimes what she was grateful for, sometimes the bad things she was doing, a lot about the way she felt about herself and it's interesting because I told you, she came over to my house the last time I saw her and she was like, please kill me and whatnot. But then sometimes in her journal, she would write about a fear of death, which I found really, really interesting because she kept leading herself down that path saying she wanted to die. But she also did have an aspect of fear related to death. I think she knew she was coming close, right? She was playing with fire. But it was interesting. And I think probably the thing I read the most that changed me was she wrote in there, if something happens to me and I pass away, how is my daughter ever going to be able to love herself?
How does that feel just reading her words?
Painful.
Yeah.
Painful because it was like getting a really good understanding of the inner workings of her mind and how much she was struggling. And part of it made me realize like I was right in the assumption that she was never going to get better. Yeah.
Do you feel like you read parts of her that you never heard throughout your entire life?
Oh, yeah. I also learned of things she did that, I had no idea about. One of the things she wrote about was leaving me home by myself when I was an infant to go to the liquor store for like 45 minutes. And she, was writing in her journal, how could I ever do that to my baby? But she did it.
When you read her journal, when you complete them, right? I'm sure that during reading them, there's a lot of emotions of like roller coasters that go through processing those words. When you finally complete them, is there healing? Is there more grief? Is there anger?
A little bit of both. A little bit of both. I definitely felt a lot of anger, reading some of the stuff that she wrote about leaving me. And I think as I get older, I understand her struggles, but at the same time, I can't understand how she let it get to the point where the way it was affecting me.
Do you feel like you look differently at your childhood and how you grew up from reading them?
No. I feel like it was pretty accurate to my experience. I think I had a little more empathy for her after I read it. A little bit. But anger as well.
Empathy and anger. I feel like anger is not really a word that you have used a lot. But do you feel like you're angry at her?
Definitely. I mean, and I think it ebbs and flows, but again, as I get older and I have the realization of, hey, this was an adult and I was a child, and some of the things that she did, I can't reconcile that. And I definitely feel angry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever read them again?
I do sometimes. Sometimes I'll read them, and they definitely make me cry every time. But sometimes I read them, but very rarely. I've only probably gone back to read them like 2 to 3 times.
Do you think that reading them at different stages of your life, you feel different things?
Yeah.
Or you realize different things?
I feel like every time I read it, I realize different things. I feel like I'll read it and then I'll block it out and then I'll remember it again when I read it again.
Yeah.
I don't know why I do that to myself. It's like self-torture. I don't know. But it's complicated. Like I feel like through reading it and every time I read it, I have a better understanding of like who she was and what was actually going through her mind during these times. But then like I can't understand it. Like I still am just like I cannot wrap my head around how you're like this, right?
Did she talk about the root of her addiction at all in her journals?
No. Honestly, and it all goes back to she couldn't handle life. She had no coping mechanisms. Her coping mechanism was to drink.
Yeah. Does hearing about her pain let you have some empathy for her?
For sure. Yeah. I think it's hard to hear anyone in pain and not have empathy for them, right? And my mom faced some pretty dark demons, and she just couldn't overcome them. And the thing is, she had the tools, she had the resources, but she just chose not to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you happy that you have those journals? Do you feel like it's allowed you to heal, or do you think it's made this process harder for you?
I'm happy that I have the journals, for sure. It answers some questions.
The journals change things, but not in a clear way. It's not like you read something and suddenly everything makes sense and you're at peace. It's more like you start seeing pieces of someone you didn't have access to before, and that can shift how you hold it without actually undoing any of it. And sometimes that shift is where something like forgiveness starts to take shape. Not all at once, and not in a way that feels complete, but in small ways you don't always notice at first.
It's complicated because I still feel anger towards her, but I definitely forgive her. I mean, she couldn't help herself.
Yeah. What was that process like for you to get to that forgiveness?
I think it just slowly happened over time, and just like the realization that what she was doing, she wasn't doing it to hurt anybody else. She was doing it to hurt herself, right? And that's, I mean, I have empathy for that, for sure.
Yeah. What does that one-sided forgiveness mean to you?
It means moving on and deciding that you're not going to let part of your life ruin the rest of your life. But like those parts are important, right? Like going through things like this is important. There's a lot of meaning and contrast, and you can't fully experience happiness without experiencing sadness, right? And so it sucks I went through some of those things, but I appreciate them for what they are and where they got me.
It's strange how something from so long ago can still show up in really present parts of your life. Not always in obvious ways, but in what you value, what you look for, what you refuse to compromise on. And sometimes that's where you start to see how much of your past you've actually carried forward.
I've always craved stability. I grew up in such an unstable home, and I knew if I created that for myself, no one could take it away from me.
My favorite probably question, how did you meet your husband?
So my husband and I met through work. This is my favorite question, too. It's my favorite story. We met on Skype for Business. I always say Skype for Business, the now old Tinder, now it's Teams. And we started communicating over, again, Skype, so like online, and it got spicy. And we had a conference in London, and I was like, I can't meet you there in front of all of our colleagues. So he flew out to see me, and we got engaged 2 weeks later.
2 weeks later,
Yeah.
you get engaged, and there are requirements around that. Did you automatically apply for a visa at that point for him?
Yeah, we did. We retained an attorney and immediately started the process because we were like, we want to be together as soon as possible. So we were long distance that entire year, and we saw each other once a month going back and forth. But yeah, my husband is from Scotland, so hence the visa.
7 years later, do you have conversations with, like, does he know all of this about you?
Yeah.
You bring that
My
to the
husband
table.
knows every single thing about me. He probably knows things about me he wishes he doesn't know.
This is where I see things starting to come full circle. Because when you start thinking about becoming a parent, it forces you to look at your own childhood differently. Not just what happened, but what you want to do differently.
I'm definitely like, I want to be a mother, but I'm terrified of being a mother just because I don't have the experience, I don't have the guidance, and I don't have that like female support system. But I still have the desire to do it, and to do it better than my mom did.
How do you think you'll talk to your kids about your mom?
I don't know. I'm terrified of that. That's like my number one fear about having kids is explaining where my mom is and what my childhood was like.
Do you think you'll use her journals at all?
No, because I don't want my kids to feel the way I felt when I read them.
And just to let you know, I don't think anyone really knows how to be a parent until they can think they know how to be a parent.
Yeah.
But they certainly do not until you are put in a situation of parenthood.
Scary stuff.
It is scary, and it continues to be scary. But being emotionally aware, having control of your emotions, I think are the first steps to being a good parent,
Yeah.
right? Like not creating an environment of chaos of what you grew up in. So
Right.
everything that you have built until now is everything a child would want.
Yeah.
So I know that there's
Peace
like,
is my priority.
yeah, I know
Like
that
a
you just
peaceful-
spoke to like
yeah.
fear behind it, but like you don't need a lot to be able to raise a kid. Like you just need that love and
Yeah.
stability for them.
I'll definitely have that.
Do you think you'll show your kids pictures of her?
I think if they ask, and I mean, naturally they probably will ask. And
Yeah.
when I was a child, it's something I probably would have asked.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I don't want it to be this kind of looming secret, but I feel like you got to find a way to make it age appropriate if you're gonna share that part of my life.
It brings up that question that people always talk about, nature versus nurture. But when addiction is actually part of your family, it stops being theoretical. It becomes something you have to think about in a real way. How do you find that balance? How do you prepare your kids for something like that? Making them aware of it without making them feel like it's something waiting for them.
I'm definitely going to talk about that with my kids. I'm not entirely sure how I will approach it, but I definitely want them to be aware that there is a genetic component because it's, that's happened in my family, right? My grandmother's father was a terrible alcoholic. My grandmother was not an alcoholic. Then my mother was an alcoholic, right? So that's one of my biggest fears is that my kids will struggle with that.
Yeah.
So they'll definitely be aware. It's just, again, figuring out, how do you communicate that?
There are a lot of resources out there
Yeah.
of how to speak with children about that and the awareness behind addiction and just age appropriate things that weren't available before. I think for someone like your grandmother and our older generation, it was like a don't ask, don't tell like type of situation and hidden, when now we know so much more about addiction and alcoholism and access to resources
Yeah.
to get out of it as
Yeah,
well.
and I'll definitely lean on those resources, but I do want there to be the aspect of our family has a firsthand experience with this sort of thing, and you need to really understand what the consequences are if you go down this path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of alcoholism, there's a lot of shame within it. And so if you create an environment that doesn't have some sort of empathy for allowing someone to express shame, then it creates that more resentment and hidden nature of things.
And it's interesting too, because I feel like sometimes I don't want there to be fear or too much restriction around it either, because I think sometimes when you try to restrict something so much, your kids end up maybe going the opposite way, right?
For
So it's
sure.
how do you end up
Absolutely.
finding that balance? But hopefully I will achieve it. But I still want them to, I don't know, I want to find a good way for me to be able to share that firsthand experience, but it still be age appropriate, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it's important for them to understand this is your family.
Yeah.
That could be you very easily,
And when you've been through something like that, it doesn't just shape the hard parts of your life. It also shapes how you see yourself and what you believe you're capable of moving forward.
What has your childhood taught you?
That you have agency over your own life. You get to choose. Don't let the worst moments of your life define you.
Why is it important for you to be talking about this, about grief, about breaking cycles, about addiction?
I think it's important because I think when you grow up in a situation like this, there's only two possible outcomes. You end up exactly like your parent, or you end up entirely different. And I think some people don't think they have a choice to turn out differently than, what they're used to and what they grew up with, right? And you do have a choice.
When you think about your mom now, what feelings surface for you?
Still pain, a lot of pain for me, but also a lot more understanding than I used to have.
This isn't something that just goes away over time. It changes, it shifts, but it stays with you in different ways. And I think because of that, there are certain questions that you don't really leave.
Do you feel like you love your mom?
I feel like I repress it, but I wouldn't be in this much pain if I didn't.
Is there anything that you wish you could ask your mom?
Probably like a million different things, right? Why? Probably why is the number one question. Like, why couldn't you just help yourself?
Yeah.
What, did you not want to? Were you incapable of it? Because you had so many resources and for a long time, a huge support system, right?
And things to live for, too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There isn't a clear answer to a question like that. Not something that fully explains it or makes it make sense. And that's part of what makes it so hard to carry. Because some questions don't really get answered. You just learn how to live alongside them. Starr, thank you for trusting us with your story. There's something really complicated about loving someone who hurt you, and even more complicated about grieving someone whose addiction shaped your entire childhood. And I think what your story shows so clearly is that not everything gets tied up so neatly. You can understand someone and still have questions. You can feel empathy for them and still carry anger. And you can love them, even if that love looks different than people expect. Forgiveness doesn't always come with closure. It doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it looks like deciding that what you went through doesn't get to define what comes next. If this episode resonated with you, if any part of this felt familiar, just know that you are not alone in that. You're allowed to hold multiple truths at once. You're allowed to love someone and still acknowledge the ways that they hurt you. And you're allowed to build something different for yourself. Thank you for being here, and we will see you next time on For the Haters.